Imagine being sealed inside a metal cylinder the size of a minivan. No light, no room to stand, the ocean pressing down on you from every direction. 500 feet of freezing, crushing darkness above your head. You have one sandwich, one can of lemonade, and a ticking clock on how much air you have left to breathe. This isn't the Titan submersible story you already know. This happened 50 years earlier, and almost nobody talks about it. 2 men, 84 hours. And a rescue so impossible it still holds a world record to this day. This is the true story of the Pisces III. C2P and Cho TX in 2023. The world watched in horror as 5 people disappeared beneath the North Atlantic in a submersible called the Titan. News channels ran countdown clocks. Experts lined up to explain just how unlikely a rescue would be. For 5 straight days, this story consumed everything, until underwater cameras confirmed the worst, a catastrophic implosion, no survivors. For most of us, nothing like that had ever happened before. It felt like a movie, unreal, unprecedented. But here's what almost no one reported during all of that coverage: it had happened before. Almost the exact same scenario, the same ocean, a similarly sized vessel, a desperate race against a dwindling air supply. It happened in 1973. And unlike the Titan, it ended with the 2 men inside walking out alive. To understand how remarkable that is, you need to understand what these machines actually are. Because a lot of people confuse submersibles with submarines, and they are not the same thing. A submarine is a large, powerful, military-grade vessel. It generates its own power. It can travel across oceans completely independently. It enters and leaves port on its own. Think of it like a ship that happens to travel underwater. A submersible is something very different. It's much smaller. It operates on limited battery power. And critically, it cannot function on its own. It depends entirely on a mothership on the surface to launch it, guide it, and bring it back up. If something goes wrong and the mothership can't recover it, the submersible and everyone inside it is simply stuck. The Pisces III was a submersible. 20 feet long, 7 feet wide, 11 feet high, roughly the same dimensions as the Titan. And in the summer of 1973, 2 men were using it for a job that was, frankly, incredibly dull. THETWO man Roger Mallinson was 35 years old, a mechanical engineer, and by late August 1973, a very tired one. Roger Chapman was 28 and had previously served as a submariner in the Royal Navy. The 2 of them had been hired to work on a project for the U.S. Postal Service, laying transatlantic telephone cable along the seabed about 150 miles southwest of Cork, Ireland. The work itself was exhausting and monotonous. For 8-hour shifts at a time, they'd crawl along the ocean floor at half a mile per hour, dragging cable, stirring up clouds of sediment that wiped out all visibility. Whoever was piloting had to maintain absolute concentration to keep a straight line, because even the slightest drift meant the cable wouldn't lay properly. Hour after hour in a cramped metal compartment barely big enough to stretch out in, with nothing but the low hum of machinery and the occasional jolt of turbulence from the seafloor below. Despite all of that, the 2 men genuinely got along well, which, given how close the quarters were, was essentially a survival requirement. On the morning of Wednesday, August 29, 1973, Mallinson was running on fumes. An earlier dive had found a fault in the Pisces III, and he'd spent the previous 26 consecutive hours repairing it. While he was at it, he also performed some routine maintenance, including swapping out the oxygen tank. The existing tank was still about half full. Protocol said to leave it in. But Mallinson figured since he wasn't sleeping anyway, he'd put in a fresh one. That decision, as it turns out, would save both their lives. CCI 3. THN to just before 10 o'clock that morning, the shift was wrapping up. The Pisces III surfaced, and Mallinson was already mentally halfway to his bunk. All he wanted was sleep. 8 hours, maybe 10. He wasn't asking for much. The submersible bobbed on the surface as the crew above worked to attach a tow line that would haul it back onto the mothership. It was a routine procedure, done dozens of times before. But in the middle of that process, someone accidentally opened one of the hatches before the submersible was properly secured. Water poured in immediately. The weight of the flooding water yanked the rear of the vessel downward, and within seconds the entire submersible flipped upside down. Mallinson and Chapman were hurled around the interior as the Pisces III started to sink, fast. The 2 men immediately started releasing ballast weight, about 400 pounds of lead. Trying to slow the descent, it barely made a difference. They shut off all electrical systems. Killed the depth gauge because the needle was spinning so fast it risked bursting. And then they just held on. 30 seconds after that hatch opened on the surface, The Pisces III slammed into the ocean floor at roughly 40 miles per hour. When the shaking stopped and the noise faded, Mallinson and Chapman were lying in pitch-black silence, upside down 575 feet beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. One of them clicked on a flashlight. They looked each other over. Somehow, impossibly, neither one of them was seriously injured. Parts of the submersible had broken loose during the fall and lay scattered around them. The compartment they were in had held. They were alive. But they both understood immediately what that meant. They were alive for now, and the clock had started. Cecitron 4, Forrester Hoyars on the surface chaos. The crew knew the submersible had sunk. They knew the two men were inside. But here was the first brutal problem. Nobody knew where the Pisces III had landed. A buoy line connected to the submersible had snapped during the fall, and when the vessel came to rest on the seabed, it had settled into a gully and was partially buried under mud. It had effectively vanished. Less than 30 minutes after the sinking, the surface team managed to reach Mallinson and Chapman by telephone. The submersible had a hardwire comm system. Both men confirmed they were okay. They were making preparations. And the surface team delivered the news they already feared: we don't know where you are yet. Finding you is going to take time. When the call ended, the two men got to work on the only thing they could actually control, making their air last as long as possible. That meant doing essentially nothing. No moving around, no talking. Lying completely still in the dark, controlling their breathing, conserving every cubic centimeter of oxygen they could. The submersible's CO2 scrubbing system worked by running a fan through lithium hydroxide to absorb the carbon dioxide being exhaled. Normally, they'd flip this on every 40 minutes. To stretch their supply, they started letting the CO2 build up a little longer than safe before running the fan. They used an egg timer, set it for 40 minutes. Then waited a bit longer before flipping the switch. It made them groggy, lethargic. Their heads felt heavy and foggy. But it bought them time. Mallinson suddenly remembered something else. The oxygen tank he'd changed the day before. Fresh, full 72 hours of air. If he hadn't swapped it out during those sleepless repair hours, they'd have maybe half of that. The decision he'd made out of sheer stubbornness during a sleepless night had just doubled their survival window. They also discovered that condensation was forming on the cold metal walls of the submersible. It wasn't much, but periodically one of them would lean over and lick the walls just to wet their mouth. Between the two of them, they had one cheese sandwich and one can of lemonade, and they agreed not to touch either until they absolutely had to. So they lay there in the dark. Occasionally, one of them would reach out a hand. The other would grab it and squeeze. That was enough. Tipo 5 Tichi Rascui Ifahotgans above the surface. The effort to save them was ramping up fast. The sister ship carrying the Pisces III was contacted in the North Sea and ordered to return to port immediately. The U.S. Navy dispatched a deep-sea rescue vehicle called the FURV, a remotely operated submersible, which was loaded onto a Canadian Coast Guard ship and sent toward Ireland at full speed. By 8 that evening, a second mothership was docked in Cork, loading both the Pisces C and the Pisces V. By 10:30 p.m., 12 hours after the accident, they were at sea. 2 days later, on the morning of Friday, August 31st, the support ships started arriving on site. The Pisces V was the first to deploy. It descended to the seabed and began searching for the Pisces III. But it ran its battery down before finding anything and had to surface to recharge. By this point, the men were estimated to have roughly 18 hours of air remaining. They still hadn't been found. Then someone had an idea that was either brilliant or desperate, probably both. They got back on the phone with Chapman and Mallinson and asked one of them to sing. The hope was that a hydrophone, an underwater microphone, could pick up the sound vibrations and help triangulate their location. Chapman, who presumably had more energy than Mallinson at this point, started singing. Song after song after song, belting out whatever came to mind in the cold darkness of a sunken submersible on the bottom of the Atlantic, and it worked. The Pisces V locked onto the signal and found the Pisces E here. You'd think that finding the submersible was the hard part. It wasn't. What followed was one of the most maddening sequences of mechanical failures you could possibly imagine. Almost everything that could go wrong did. The Pisces V tried to attach a lift rope to the Pisces III. The rope was too buoyant. The hook wouldn't catch. Attempt after attempt failed. The Pisces III was repaired and deployed, but the moment it hit the water, it started flooding. exactly like what had happened to the Pisces III. It was pulled back aboard immediately. The Cradit was finally brought online, and the moment it was powered up, it suffered an electrical fault and was stranded on deck. Engineers worked through the night on both the Cradit and the Pisces II. By midnight, they were still at it. Below the ocean, Mallinson and Chapman had now officially passed the 72-hour mark, the rated capacity of that fresh oxygen tank. Their survival beyond that point was entirely down to those hours of careful conservation. Lying still, waiting longer between scrubbing cycles, licking condensation off the walls, every small decision adding precious minutes. But the lithium hydroxide supply was running out. When it was gone, the CO2 would build unchecked, and they'd slip into unconsciousness. At around 4 a.m. on Saturday, September 1st, more than 76 hours after the accident, the Pisces III was finally operational. It went down, located the Pisces III within minutes, and successfully attached its hook. A few hours later, the third descended as well and got its own line attached. At 10:50 a.m., the lift began. THESCMT and RCC, the Pisces III shuddered and groaned as it peeled away from the ocean floor. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, it began to rise. Mallinson, despite everything, was worried. The rescue vehicles had attached their ropes to the aft section of the submersible, the rear, rather than the structurally reinforced foresphere. There had been no other option given how it had come to rest in the mud. But if those ropes snapped, the submersible either stayed on the bottom forever, or worse, the compartment they were sitting in could be compromised. There was nothing to do but hold on. The ascent took over an hour. About 100 feet from the surface, divers came down and attached additional, heavier lift lines to the outside of the vessel, stabilizing it, securing it. And then, at 1:17 p.m. on September 1st, 1973, 3 hours after they hit the bottom, the Pisces III broke the surface. But it wasn't over. The impact with the sea bead had jammed the hatch shut. From outside, the recovery team hammered and pried at it while Mallinson and Chapman checked their oxygen gauge inside. Less than 1 hour of air left. 10 minutes passed, 20, 30. Then, a sound like a gunshot. A loud, sharp crack that startled everyone within earshot. The hatch burst open. Sunlight and cold Atlantic air flooded into the submersible. Both men were immediately blinded. They hadn't seen light in 3.5 days. Headaches hit them instantly. They didn't care. Before climbing out, Mallinson checked the gauge one last time. 12 minutes of air remaining. Both men were examined by doctors on board. Mallinson had mild hypothermia. Both were dehydrated. That was it. Considering what they had survived, the doctors could barely believe it. They had stretched a 72-hour oxygen supply by 12.5 extra hours through sheer discipline, stillness, and will. Roger Chapman went on to dedicate the rest of his life to submersible rescue, founding a company specifically for that purpose. He passed away in 2020 from cancer. Roger Mallinson is still alive now in his 80s, and every single year after the rescue, at the exact minute the hatch opened on September 1st, 1973, he would pick up the phone and call Chapman. Their rescue remains to this day the deepest successful underwater rescue ever performed in human history.